What is your biggest failure? Have you been able to move past it? Does it still impact your daily life? Last year, I failed to accomplish a very important personal goal, something that brought me to my knees. Today, I'm going to share that story with you and also the lessons that I've discovered about how to overcome it. But let's start by doing a little visualization. So please get comfortable in your seat. Perhaps take a long, deep breath. And I'd like you to think about the greatest success that you've ever experienced. Now, take a little trip back in time. Can you remember when you set the goal? Can you remember all the planning that you did that helped you achieve that success? Okay, now clear your minds. One more visualization. This time, I want you to think about that big failure. Again, go back in time. Can you remember when you set that goal? Can you remember all the planning that you did that didn't come to fruition? Perhaps you can remember the exact moment when you knew that you were going to fail. And maybe just the thought of that failure is bringing back lots of feelings of shame. If you're anything like me, it was much easier to think about the failure and the planning that didn't come to fruition than the success. Let me talk to you a little bit about my goal. In late 2021, I began to have a little bit of a midlife crisis. When my father was 48 years old, he had a heart attack that nearly ended his life. As I approached my mid-40s, with every passing year, that's all I could really think about. I knew that I needed to make a change in my life. And, like most things in my life, I wanted to do something big. I needed to prove to myself and to everyone else around me that I wasn't going to have the same fate, that I was going to do something different. Running has always been a passion for my family. I remember as a small child watching my father do many races, and I'd always hoped that I'd be able to do the same someday. I was able to run a marathon with my dad a few years after he had his heart attack. This was a great experience that I'll certainly cherish for the rest of my life. As I was trying to determine what kind of goal that I wanted to set, I knew that a marathon probably wasn't going to cut it. I remember as a child, one particular race that I watched my father run that I was super impressed with. It was called the Hood to Coast Relay Race, a race that started at the Mount Hood Ski Resort and ended in Seaside, Oregon, as the participants ran across the sand to the finish line. That's the type of race that I was looking for. So I went on the hunt to see if I could find something similar, and I found it in this race called the Rut. The Rut is a series of races that are hosted in Big Sky, Montana every September. There's multiple distances, but the 28K distance is the most popular, and many would say the most challenging of the entire series. This race is regularly listed in the top 10 most difficult races in the world. It involves almost 8,000 feet of elevation gain as you summit multiple 10,000-foot peaks. This was the type of race I was looking for. Now, looking back on it now, as I even just set this goal, a couple of things happened that I didn't really realize at the time, but I could feel it. My serotonin and dopamine levels were on the rise. These would help me to really imagine being successful in this goal. Also, the amygdala in my brain was trying to determine just how important this goal was to me. It would use that to help work with my frontal lobe as I started to plan for how I was going to train for this race. This was an extremely important goal for me. So I was feeling great. I had all the motivation in the world, and now I needed to plan. I spoke with several people who had competed in and completed the race in years past, and they guided me to an online training guide that could be purchased. A training guide that would give me week-by-week instructions of exactly how long to run. Sounded perfect to me. So I purchased that guide and started training. I also did what probably anybody else would do in 2022, which is that I shared my goal in every step along the way on every social media platform I had access to. This actually helped a lot with my motivation, as every like and positive comment on my posts was just extra fuel to the fire. So I was ready, I was prepared, and then came race day. Race day in Big Sky, Montana in 2022 was unseasonably hot, almost 100 degrees. The race is ran almost entirely above tree line, which means that you just are exposed to the elements nearly the entire time. In years past, 10 to 15% of the participants end up dropping out of the race. In 2022, twice that amount. There are 4 checkpoints along the way in the race with strict time cutoffs to ensure the safety of the runners. At the 4th and final checkpoint, over 14 miles into a nearly 18-mile race, I missed the time cutoff by less than 5 minutes. Now, I got to experience something a little different. Failure. And the feelings that I was experiencing at that time, just like the dopamine and serotonin hit that I got when I set the goal, were extremely strong. For those of you that have had and experienced any kind of a major failure in your life, you've felt this. My cortisol levels rose immediately. As I was riding in the back of a Big Sky Mountain pickup truck down to the finish line, I was trying to determine what the heck my next steps were. How was I going to tell all these people that knew about this goal, that knew about my training, that I had failed? I just couldn't do it. When I reached the finish line, I was greeted by my wife and children, also friends that had traveled with us to Big Sky that day. They comforted me, told me how much they loved me, were proud of me for the effort that I put in, and that immediate feeling of love definitely helped to cushion my fall. Then I was scheduled to speak in front of about 300 colleagues at a sales conference the week following. I already had my presentation created. It was a presentation about running the rut, about setting lofty goals, and how if you work really hard, you'll have success. Well, I had to change my presentation. I decided to still talk about the run, but I changed it. I talked about failure and how it's not the end of the world, that you can still experience failure, never get up, and keep going. The standing ovation that I received from my colleagues that day was the final dose of medicine that I needed to recover from the immediate impact of that failure. But what was I going to do next? I set a big goal, everybody knew about it. I failed, everybody knew about it. For many people in this instance, they may not set any goals that lofty ever again. Others may decide to set smaller goals and slowly climb up the ladder where they may feel safe again to set a goal that large. Those of you that might know me, and I guess those that don't will now understand, that doesn't work for me. I decided to get right back on that horse that bucked me off, and I signed up for the Rut 28K again in early 2023. I was just as excited, but I was a little apprehensive because I didn't understand what it was that caused me to fail. As I began my training in March and April, my family and I received devastating news that would change the course of my training this year. My father, the person who inspired me to set this goal in the first place, found out from his doctor that his congestive heart failure had finally gotten the best of him. In early May, he was told that his condition was too advanced and there was nothing else that they could do. He was given just weeks to live. I knew at this point, no matter what happened, no matter how hard I trained, it was more than likely that my father would not be there with me. So I decided I needed to do something else sooner. I decided to run the Montana Half Marathon in May. I finished that race. I was able to show my father that medal and share in that joy with him, and I'm glad that I did so as quickly as I did. The doctors were right, and on June 6, 2023, my father passed away. In the days following my father's passing, I took stock of a lot of things in life. And one of the things that I thought a lot about was why I failed. This is when I learned one of the big lessons about overcoming failure, being brutally honest about why I failed. The problem wasn't that I didn't have a plan, and the problem wasn't the conditions that day in Big Sky. The problem was that I didn't follow my plan and I wasn't prepared. There were plenty of days during my training that year that I might skip a run, maybe cut something short, do 8 hill repeats instead of 12. Even though I didn't expect it to be 100 degrees that day, I should have expected that I needed to carry electrolytes and salt to have a fueling plan to make it through a race like that. If I would have done any of those things, I would have been successful. I'm fortunate enough to have an ultra runner in my family, somebody who had offered to do a different kind of training plan for me this year. He would send me a text message every week with the exact plan for the week. Even if I was traveling for business, which I did often, he would help tailor that plan so I never missed a workout. My siblings and I also decided that we wanted to run a race in honor of my father. So we decided to run the Beartooth Run 10K and half marathon, which is ran at 10,000 feet at the top of Beartooth Pass. The four of us ran that race. We all finished. We were able to raise $14,000 for the charity of my dad's choice, the Beartooth Christian Ranch. And when I finished the race that day, I had an experience that I will never, ever forget. My finishing time was 2 hours, 22 minutes, 22, and although you can't see it on the screen, 0.2 seconds. I've ran many races in my life. I've looked at lots of results. I've never seen a race finishing number that was all the same digit. And while that might seem like a coincidence, I don't believe that it was. What I knew is that my father's high school sports number was 22. I knew he was with me that day. And that's something I will certainly never forget. Around that time, a coworker told me that he and another friend wanted to get into mountain running. They had found a race called the Prospector Run that happens in Cook City, and they wanted to know if I would be willing to join them. It was scheduled to happen about 30 days out from the rut. And I thought, what the heck? Sure, I'll do it with you. So I signed up for that 30K. The three of us completed the race that day, and that's when I learned another big lesson for overcoming failure, which is to accept additional challenges. If I wouldn't have done the Beartooth Run, I wouldn't have known that I could have successfully ran a half marathon at over 10,000 feet. If I wouldn't have done the Prospector Run, I wouldn't have known that I could do more than a 28K mountain race. At this point, I was as prepared as possible to go back to Big Sky for the race. But here's the thing. I created this presentation long before I went back to the race. I really had no idea what was going to happen. I was either going to be talking to you today about a great success or talking about how you can recover from multiple failures in a row. I decided it didn't really matter. No matter what the outcome, the lessons I learned, I would carry with me for the rest of my life. But my family and I returned to Big Sky on September 16th of this year, and I was successful. I was able to complete the race in 6 hours and 14 minutes, over 2 hours ahead of that final cutoff time. The lessons that I learned this year, I will simply never forget. And as you leave here today, think about your big failures and your future goals. I hope that you'll remember a few things. Build a strong support network. Share your goals with them, your successes, but also your failures. Those are the people that will pick you up when you fall. Be brutally honest about why you failed. It's the only way you'll ever be able to move past it and achieve your goals the next time. And accept additional challenges. Sometimes you'll never know how those additional challenges may be exactly what you need to achieve that goal that you've set out to achieve. Above all else, remember that no matter how big the failure is, it might be the stepping stone that you need to achieve the success that you really want. Thank you.